I think the biggest thing to think about is how does the consumer feel after the experience, right? So
Hmm.
that's really where you build brand loyalty. So you're done with the job, and two technicians can repair the HVAC system in the same exact fashion. But what was the experience going through that entire process, soup to nuts, from the moment they placed the first phone call to the moment the technician showed up, and the communications all throughout that process? And how did that experience at the end of the day make the homeowner feel?
All right, guys. So I'm here with Dan Antonelli, and I have, a lot of times, Dan, I will be working with I'll have a client reach out to me to work on their marketing stuff, and I'll notice they have a really good brand, and I'll say, "Is that a Dan Antonelli job?" And they'll say, "Yeah." So that's kind of been my, just seeing stuff you do on Facebook, and then various companies reaching out that use your brand. That's kind of been my introduction to you. But yeah, so I'm super excited to dive in today. We were talking a little bit before, but you know, I really want to talk about how companies can distinguish themselves and build up value by being different, by being the ideal company, like looking at kind of from the customer's perspective of like who's looking for them, right? And then matching that. So I'm excited to dive into that with you. But before we dive into that, the first question I had was like if you had to design everything about like what makes a brand good and like all those different components, like if you had to design the worst possible brand for an HVAC company, what would that look like?
Well, we'd start with an awful name, and we would call it TS Heating and Air, or even worse would be TS Mechanical or TS HVAC. And then we would deploy some amazing sun and snowflakes into the logo. It would be a white van, and it would be red, white, and blue as my brand colors. And
Interesting. Okay.
and that would be the recipe for the worst possible way you could ever brand your home service business.
I watched another podcast. I think it's the one you did with Tim Brown, where you brought up the sun and snowflakes, and that one as well. What's your gripe with that? What's the story behind that?
Well, let's put it this way. If you go on Google and you were to type in heating and air conditioning company logo examples,
Uh,
and you take a screenshot of what's presented to you, you will see an awful lot of sameness.
yeah.
And that's the opposite of what you want. You want your brand to not look like what every other HVAC brand typically looks like, because in doing so, then you've just essentially made yourself more invisible because there's nothing about it that would cause a consumer to file it in their memory and to be able to recall it later on. Maybe they might be able to discern what you do,
Hmm.
but they won't have the who is doing it registered
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. And
So
you were talking about how the T and the S is or like the initials are, it's people aren't going to remember initials. I listened to that in your book as well. What about the mechanical? I'm curious about that, about
so
why that's a
mechanical
bad.
is, yeah, I mean mechanical is not a it's jargon. It's jargon for heating and air basically. So
Oh, okay.
typically again, Mrs. Jones does not associate mechanical, the word mechanical, with heating and air conditioning. They tend to,
Hmm.
and it's not just women, I mean men as well too, sometimes believe it has something to do with fixing cars
Yeah,
or
that's what I
things
would
like
guess.
that.
Yeah.
If you did commercial work, the word mechanical is more appropriate for the commercial market, and facility managers know that what that means, but many homeowners don't. So again, why do I want a name, or why would I ever have a name that has the potential to confuse somebody about what my key offering is? So anyone that comes to us that's named mechanical, the first thing we're going to do is change that to say heating and air or heating and air conditioning.
Do you think most like I'm trying to put myself, like I'm a marketer as well, so like any you know company I start or when I was starting Service Allies, I put a lot of thought into that name. I'm just curious, like, what is the mindset of somebody who starts a business? Like, is that just like the easiest thing to grab? It's like my initials and like what the company does, or like what causes somebody to not think through it? Do you think?
I mean, listen, the biggest reason is just lack of understanding and not really knowing any better. I mean, that's the ultimate reason. I mean, that's literally why I wrote the book on home service branding, because
Yeah.
I felt like, man, it's such a shame that when you started this business, you didn't have this knowledge, because now we're having to undo the mistakes that were literally made on day one.
Yeah.
And naming is a huge piece of it. Like, we'll rename probably 50 home service companies this year alone. And, you know, 80% of them, really, that mistake could have been avoided if they had a better understanding of why naming was so important from day one. And the biggest chapter in the book is actually on naming.
Hmm.
And it's the most critical piece that is the um, most often not done correctly, I should say.
Right. Well, can a company like if they started off with a really sucky name, can they just like get a DBA and like market themselves differently and have a different name on the contracts? Like, is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
feasible?
absolutely.
Or...
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, the process of renaming isn't as complex as people, maybe assume it, but 95% of everyone that we rename simply does a DBA.
Okay. Gotcha. And then
So
the
from
work is just like the branding and the like
yeah,
changing everything. Yeah.
so from a financial and a operational perspective, it's not as big a deal. You have implications that relate back to digital marketing. You have those kind of things that have to be done in a very deliberate and very specific manner. And there's a roadmap to follow so that you don't, lose any momentum going through that process. But
Hmm.
the legal aspect of it is actually very easy.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging then for anyone who might want to do that. It's not like they'll have to, rebuild it. Well, it kind of is like they'll have to rebuild their company from scratch in some ways, but um, from the legal standpoint, that's pretty easy. Okay. So, I was talking about, before we started, how a lot of the people that reach out to me, like we try to do when we write ads for people, we try to talk about what's unique about that company in the ad. And so, we ask like, what their unique selling points are and why do customers typically choose you versus competitors and stuff like that. And the answer that we get 95% of the time is quality and service. You know what I mean? And like to some extent it makes sense. Like for an HVAC company, there's kind of like that's what customers want is like, good quality works. The system isn't going to break down after the company leaves. They want good service, good communication. So um, but like so how does an HVAC company truly differentiate themselves in that kind of like I feel like there's these expectations that customers just have of an HVAC company. So how does an HVAC company be different than others? You know what I mean?
I think the biggest thing to think about is how does the consumer feel after the experience, right? So
Mm,
that's really where you build brand loyalty. So you're done with the job, and two technicians can repair the HVAC system in the same exact fashion, right? But what was the experience going through that entire process, soup to nuts, from the moment they placed the first phone call to the moment the technician showed up, and the communications all throughout that process? And how did that experience at the end of the day make the homeowner feel? Because
mm,
they're going to remember how they felt more so than they're going to remember exactly what they paid, right? So I always just try to encourage our clients to really think about, well, what are the things that we can do to, first of all, show gratitude for the ability to serve, right? So what can we be doing to there? Can we leave them with a home baked cookies that say
yeah.
thank you for your service? Can we send a follow up gift to them expressing gratitude for their service? So can we make them feel like they're not a number in a cog,
Hmm.
and that we truly are vested in their home comfort and the experience that we're going to provide?
Yeah.
Because again, you can have two companies come there and maybe both of them fix it and repair it in the same exact way, but one of them maybe makes you feel better about the experience. So what are
Hmm.
we doing as an organization to make sure that every interaction that we have with that particular client is really pushing the narrative of what makes us special, what makes us different, what makes us unique, and how do
Yeah.
we live up to that vision and that mission that we have as clients? Because listen, we know how hard it is and how expensive it is to acquire any new customer,
Right. Yeah.
and sometimes that first ticket is barely covering the cost of the lead, right? So how do we build
Mhm.
lifetime value with them? And you do it by just exemplifying the things that are actually and truly unique.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies will say that they do things a certain way and they perform a certain task and they have great service and great skills, but like, there's so many steps along that particular journey that within each interaction that that customer has with your business, impressions are being formed. Okay. And what do we do to control those impressions? What do we do to maximize the opportunity to make the most of each impression, to make the
Hmm.
most of each interaction, whether it's the text that comes before the technician arrives and the text has a
Yeah.
bio of that technician. And within that bio, the text talks about that technician is really into fishing and hiking and he loves spending
So
time with his
so
family.
here's what I'm wondering though, because there's so many like if I go start an HVAC company, like there are so many companies that I feel like are already doing that, especially in a really competitive market. Like around here, maybe not so much. I'm in Enola, Pennsylvania. It's a small town outside Harrisburg, but like, maybe like Philly, Pittsburgh, or especially out, DFW. So like, my question is like, there's so many companies kind of meeting that standard. Now, do you feel like it's better for, or maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's not. I so do you feel like for an HVAC company, do you think the emphasis should just be on like doing it better than the next guy, or do you think it should be finding something that we do that's different? Like maybe we're not good at everything, but maybe there's like one specific aspect of that service or that communication that we do better. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think to your point, though, a lot of people say that they do many of these things very well,
True, yeah.
but I think that they fall short on a multitude of ways in which they could be definitely doing better than the other company. So whether it's the CSRs, again, whether it's the follow-ups, the text messaging that is happening, the expectations about when the technician is arriving, who the technician is that's coming into the home. Think about that, right? So imagine you get a text as the homeowner and it introduces you to the person that's going to be entering your home. And you find out that he's a coach of the softball team in your home community. And you find out that he's got family that go to the same middle school that your kid
Mm,
goes to, right? So
right,
so
yeah.
you're creating pathways to make connections and establish empathy, right? So empathy is one of the key aspects of making someone believe and feel something about a brand, right? So all these different things, it's funny. There was a company that, and I always thought this was genius, that did carpet cleaning, and they were called Pineapple Carpet Cleaners. And every job that they finished, when they were done, they would literally leave the client a brand new, fresh pineapple.
That's
Now,
cool.
now, now, think about the genius of that in the sense that versus the carpet cleaner that was called HS Carpet Cleaning, and then it's 3 years later you decide I'm going to get my carpet cleaned again. What was the name of that company? There's zero chance they remember the name of that company. But do you think that they forgot the name of Pineapple Carpet Cleaning when the guy left the
Yeah,
pineapple? You
that's
know
a
what I
good
mean?
point.
And it's like simple things like that too that are so genius, but it's again that those connections that you're trying to make from an empathy perspective, right? So what is something that we can do to create empathy and create that connection? Like another example, like we did a billboard campaign for a plumbing company, plumbing, heating, and air in Oklahoma for quality heating and air, and you know the headline was quality. I think quality is here for you, right? We're here for you. We celebrate you. Sorry, it was we celebrate you. And what they did, they were digital billboards, and they literally asked the community, "Hey, who do you think we could recognize that's important in your life?" And they would call out somebody's birthday, and they would have the birthday billboard running on a daily basis, right? And then, of course, the family would be super stoked. They would go out, they would take pictures, they would tag everybody, all their friends, and what do you think that did? It connected quality to the community in a way
Right.
because now you have this person who is not affiliated with quality, but
Hmm.
they got their daughter's picture who just won the cheerleading competition on the digital billboard,
Yeah.
right? So again,
Very cool. Yeah.
what are the pathways that you're doing to stand out? And the pathways isn't to say that you offer satisfaction guaranteed, okay? Or that you're, same day service.
Right.
Like that's all bullshit. Like I don't care
I'm
about
just
that.
laughing because in our ads we have a lot of satisfaction guarantees. But sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I'm not trying to call you out, but like as a consumer, I
Sure.
expect to be satisfied and guaranteed. Like it's
Right.
not
Sure.
unique to you, but what is unique? What is something about that you're doing that does feel different, that
Hmm.
does feel compelling? Because you keep blasting messages about same day service or satisfaction guaranteed or on
Right.
time. Well, I expect that already. Like that's not new to
That's a
me.
good point. Yeah.
And that's not going to live in my mind and be able to recall in 30 days because you got to remember too, you look at truck wraps, you look at billboards, those are mediums that 98% of the people seeing them on a daily basis do not need, right? It's all about recall later on. So what are you doing to make the best use of those impressions so
Yeah.
that you can live in someone's mind later on? Because that's what it's about. Buying leads in PPC and LSA, that's immediate. Okay. I need a
Right.
plumber. Okay. Sure. I'm going to pay. I'm going to have that. But wouldn't it be better if they knew the name of my company instead of plumbing repair near me? Then I'm not going to pay an arm and a leg for that same lead. So people forget
Yeah. That
about
makes sense.
sort of the point of billboards and even truck wraps or site signs and things like that, thinking it's direct response. They want to put a QR code on that shit, or they want to put a big phone number on it, and they think everybody driving by, they're going to call me off the billboard. Well, no, they're less than 2% of the people probably need you at that particular moment, but will they recall you later on? So that's why when you have headlines that aren't unique, that aren't funny, that aren't memorable, that aren't
Right.
related to the brand name, like all those things, that doesn't help someone recall it later on.
Right. That makes sense.
Sorry, that was
Now
a
do you,
really long answer.
no, no, all good. Like, do you think that that kind of can do you think that like how much does the industry matter in that strategy? Because like I feel like let's take remodeling for example, right? If somebody's thinking about a kitchen remodel, they're in the market for they're in the market, right? They're thinking about it for, you know, 2 years in some cases, right? Versus, you know, an HVAC system, a lot of those customers, you know, there is some like, okay, my system is getting old. I don't want to procrastinate. I'm going to go do something. But in a lot of cases, like especially like a plumbing emergency, or like in that case, when somebody you know goes and Google's that company name, they'll find the company name, they'll reach out. Um, do you guys adjust your approach for like something like remodeling where more of the people they're driving by are likely to be currently in the market versus HVAC where it's more of like brand recall? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean it's a slightly different need at that moment, right? Because the kitchen or the bath remodeling isn't urgent, generally
Right.
speaking.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's something that they've been thinking about for a while, and they're gathering at this point. They're sort of in that period of time where they're sort of thinking about it, gathering information, storing away information, and then eventually there's going to be a point in time where they decide to actually take action on that notion. And
Hmm.
maybe they're not ready at that particular point. But the
Right.
the same theory applies in the sense that I'm still trying to rent space in her head,
Yeah.
right? I'm trying to live in her, actually not even rent space. I'm trying to live in her mind rent free is what I'm trying to do, right?
Right.
So she may not be ready for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. But what was that? What was the name of that company I saw? That looked like they did really great work, that made me feel something that connected to me. It was so
Hmm.
cute. It was so memorable. It was this, that, whatever it is. And it also, it's just not going to be one repetition or one instance of that. I mean, I know there's like a famous Harvard story that my buddy Dave Carroll from Dope Marketing talks about, that it takes 7 touches for someone
Yeah.
to actually connect or remember your particular brand. And that may
Right.
be
Yeah.
true and the notion of, well, what if you can cut it to 3 touches? What if you could cut it to 4 touches? And that to me is where you want to just try to maximize every single potential opportunity of that impression, right?
Hmm.
Because if I have a brand that blends in, then yeah, maybe it does take 10 touches for you to actually remember it. But what if it could be 4 touches? What if it could be less than that? What if I saw it just once and I never forgot it? Right. So that's
Yeah.
that's the more of the theory behind disruptive branding. You think about the book Purple Cow. And I don't know if you've read the book. I think Seth Godin wrote it. I think is who wrote it. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, Purple Cow. It's like you drive in the country and you see a bunch of cows and you're not from there. So the first cow you see, you're like, holy shit, it's a cow. Like that's so cool. And then you see another cow and you see another cow and then you don't see them anymore because they all blend in. And then suddenly there was a
Yep.
purple one and it disrupted your line of sight. It disrupted your mind because you're so used to seeing the same thing. And that's why, we talk about white van syndrome, whereas everybody's used to seeing white vans all the time. And then suddenly you see something that's fully wrapped, that's different, that catches your eye. And yeah,
Yeah.
I want to stop and I want to look at that. I want to find out more about that. Right. So that, that concept is not really unique, but again, a lot of companies are just blending in with
Yeah.
brands that are just unremarkable. And the bottom line is, listen, the more unremarkable your brand is, and it's gonna sound painfully obvious, the more you need to spend to market it. Like that's
There's
just the math.
yeah, speaking of I think in some cases it's possible for yeah, it is possible to shrink those touch points to remember it. And the reason I know that is because I recently drove by a company. They're a moving company, and the name of the company is Little Guys Moving Company. And
Mhm.
it made me laugh because it didn't really like there was no real like brand promise or anything, and it was also kind of like almost a little bit like self-degrading, but not
Yeah.
in a negative enough of a way to be like, oh, it's probably a crappy company. You know what I mean? So it was
Right.
just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was funny, and now I remember it, and there's no negative connotation with it. So I don't know if I would name my company Little Guys Marketing or whatever. But yeah, there's definitely that can be. So you're saying like and I guess the reason why you wouldn't want to do direct response on the side of a van is because nobody's they're driving past you, right? They're not gonna stop and oh wait, what
Yeah.
was that? Driving down the road, what was that number
Yeah.
on that van? You know what I mean? But yeah, I see where you're like the if it's a remodeling company, they're still going to reach the bottom of the funnel and call somebody eventually,
Right.
or reach out through an ad or something like that.
Yeah.
um
I mean, and we don't even put phone numbers on a lot of our truck wraps anymore because people aren't calling. They're using their phones as assistants. So, hey Siri, call this company
right,
and use the company name,
that's a
or
good
they just
point.
go on Google and type in the company name. Do you think about the last time you yourself actually used your phone and actually dialed, the 10 digits of a phone?
Right,
Like
yeah.
honestly, like when was the last time you literally dialed your phone to get something? You know? Not
Right, yeah.
often, or not as often as certainly maybe you did 10 years ago, right?
Nope,
Um,
not at all.
and so, the website is important on a truck route, but the phone number really is not that
Yeah.
important anymore. And people say, well, I get calls from my phone number. Okay. So like if you didn't have a phone number, they wouldn't be able to figure out how to contact you. They'd be lost. They never
Mm,
heard of Google. Like, I mean, like, come on,
that's a
like
good
people
point.
aren't that technologically challenged that they wouldn't be able to contact you. And again, it's not the point. It's not direct response. Maybe they take a picture of it and then maybe they use that photo and then Google you and call you later, but they're probably not doing it while they're driving. Sometimes they do. And I get that. People are like, oh, people
Right.
call me when they're behind me, and half the times it's because they got cut off. But besides that, right? So,
Yeah,
so
no, that makes sense. And like I guess one thing I'm wondering too is like as far as so in your book you're talking about how a brand helps you, get in front of higher paying customers, right? In your experience, like for an HVAC company specifically, does it always make sense to try to be like the high end, like you're talking about, like how companies just don't execute the service very well. Like they might say they have quality and service. So is the answer for an HVAC company in your experience, like almost always, like we want to really execute the like actual service, actual empathy, actual communication in a practical sense, not just say we do it and then command higher prices for that? Or is there some cases for a business model that, maybe their unique selling point is that they're like the low price leader, right? And then they brand accordingly and figure out a way to make that business model work. Like, have you seen like other ways of doing it, or is it always like let's go after the highest paying customer, most premium
Yeah.
type of deal?
Well, I would say this, what's the best way for you to provide a premium experience to your customer? And the best way that you can achieve that is with the highest caliber technicians and the highest caliber team that you can afford to pay. And the challenge is you get stuck in this sort of hamster wheel of you're not charging enough for your service to begin with. You can't attract A players who want to be part of this particular team, and therefore you can't provide an amazing experience on the other side of it.
Mm.
So you sort of are limiting your ability on a number of different levels. It's not all about how much more money can you make as an owner. It's how much more money can I afford to pay my employees and attract the best talent to deliver the best value. And you know, it's kind of a funny story. Like there's a company that we rebranded that had a name that spoke to lower cost, right?
Mhm.
And I think they were about I think that they were about a $4 or $5 million company
Okay.
outside of Philly. And I don't want to say their name specifically, but let's say it
Sure.
was called Budget Plumbing.
Okay.
It was something like that. And so the expectation for every homeowner was that the pricing should reflect the name that it's called, Budget. Okay.
Right.
And so he was funny. He posted something on Facebook, and I became friends with this guy, and I knew him for years. And I always said, dude, like you've got to change your name. But but again, you're at 4 million in revenue. It's like, well, something's working, right? Why would I change the name?
Yeah.
And he even posted on his Facebook page, hey, do you guys think I should change my name? And he had all these people that he was friends with, and that maybe had used him and thought the name was great. Like it's awesome. Like why would you change the name? And we finally convinced him to change the name, right? And we came up with a different name. It's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit more memorable, and a brand that was certainly more memorable. He was running 30 service tickets a day, and
Wow.
after rebranding, his average tickets went up $250 per service ticket. So 30 times 250 times, 5 days a week, and it's like another $30,000 in revenue per week. All largely due to branding and
Right.
naming, right? He didn't change from an operational perspective how they ran the
So he
company.
didn't just start charging 200 more. It was just that
No, he
the
did. He just
oh he
basically
okay.
raised, yeah, his average tickets went up by $250 per ticket.
Okay.
And on 30 service tickets a day, it was like $1.5 million in revenue per year, just because the name couldn't command the dollars that they deserve. It's not like he was
Mm,
ripping them off suddenly and charging more. He was actually charging what he should have been charging all along, but could
right.
not because the name and the brand didn't support the notion that me as a consumer should actually pay a premium for this service.
Right. Yeah.
So, I get what you're saying, and there's people that supposedly do very well by touting themselves as the lower budget option. And that's fine. I will say for those people, yeah, your branding is not going to be nearly as important as it is
Yeah.
as if you're trying. I think that the problem most people have is that they actually have a really good service. They actually have a premium service. But if you were to judge them on all the different marketing channels that are presented to the consumer doesn't believe at all that there's a reason that they should actually pay a premium for it. Right. So that's where they run into these obstacles. That's why they have shitty booking rates. That's why that their close rates suck, because they're trying to actually get higher average tickets on their work, but the brand doesn't support the notion that there's any reason why I should actually pay more for this service. And
Yeah.
so the consumer's like, well, you're the highest person, but you don't look like you should be the highest person, right?
Right. Yeah.
And of course there's the selling aspect is involved in that, and it's not just the brand, but that is a piece of it. Because again, you think of the psychology behind branding, all we're trying to do is have Mrs. Jones believe that the service she will get will match up to the actual deliverable that you will provide,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know? So
100%. I
so
think yeah, and I think a problem with like I think the problem is like so many contractors are priced to go out of business. Like they just don't have a good enough
100%.
understanding with their numbers. and
100%.
homeowners, like some homeowners are ruthless and very savvy, and they know how to take advantage
Yeah.
of, new technicians starting their businesses, and they get caught in this bidding war. And then, so I think that, like in so many cases, homeowners probably just expect a lower price, than what's even realistic to somebody to be able to operate in. And then they see a name like, I don't know what the actual name was,
Yeah. Yeah.
but budget plumbing, right? And then they expect it's going to be less than those quotes. So, I could see where that creates that challenge there. But so you're saying, like, the people that came in, um, or the people that responded to his new brand were just coming in with the right expectations, so that he was able to command those higher prices and actually still sell that service and sell that, those replacements or whatever all he was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. That makes sense. Now,
And
do
again,
you?
too, the interesting thing about that story too is, getting feedback from people that aren't necessarily even the right demographics that you're trying to attract, or
Yeah,
even just friends and family who have a very specific relationship and attachment to maybe what your current brand name is, but don't truly understand what the market actually wants to see. So
yeah,
there's a sort of a cautionary tale in that too, because as owners, you may decide, hey, I think I really want to rebrand, or I really want to change the name. Let me go ask the team what they think about that idea. And I
yeah,
can guarantee you that most of the team is not excited about the name change, not excited about rebranding. It's normal for them to want to sort of keep that old brand as their warm blanket, and say things to you like, well, why do we have to change? Like, what, I don't understand. Like, what's wrong with our current
yeah,
logo? And again,
for
not
sure.
marketing people, not branding people, but people that are really comfortable with what they're doing
Is that something you
exactly.
guys run into a lot? Like, you talk to them, and like, just for some, and uh, people aren't going to tell you, like, yeah, Dan Antonelli, there's a deep emotional, reason why, I don't want to do this. But from what you've kind of been able to, like, sniff out, like, do you feel like that is just a
Oh yeah.
reason why a lot of
Oh yeah.
people refuse to change their name?
1000%. Like, in my book, I have a whole section talking about all the reasons. And I do say, I call it the warm blanket syndrome. And they use whatever success that they've achieved at this point in time as the reason why it doesn't make sense for us to change. Like, hey, dude, I'm at 5 million in revenue and you're telling me my
Okay,
logo
yeah,
sucks and my brand sucks. Why would I ever change? And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. You got to 5 million in revenue with that. Like, imagine where we might have been if we actually had a brand. And
yeah,
Tommy Mello at $35 million in revenue rebranded. Who at $35 million is saying my logo sucks, my truck wrap sucks,
yeah,
I need to change everything? Most people at 35 million in revenue are like, oh my God, this is amazing, we're killing it. Why? But he
right, yeah,
knew that where he wanted to go, and 3 years later he's at $350 million in revenue, right? So he knew where he wanted to go. He couldn't get there with what he had, and he
yeah,
recognized the deficiencies of his brand. It wasn't a premium brand, didn't look like a premium brand, but he was trying to get premium prices. And we solved all those problems. But there's a lot of examples like that of guys that very high revenue that understand that, hey, it's awesome that this got us to where we're at,
yeah,
but where we want to go, it's not going to take us to where we need to go. So you have to ask yourself the question as an owner: does my current brand actually reflect who we've become today and the level of service we provide today? If you can honestly look at your brand and say, if I would have just judged you by this, I would expect an amazing experience from your company, then great. Keep your logo, keep your brand.
right,
But if it doesn't actually look like, what you do today, and it still looks like the company that, you went to Fiverr and you got your logo from there, and you were starting up, you had no money. Like, I understand the challenges and the bootstrapping from day one, but dude, like, is that reality today? Is that
yeah,
really who you guys are today?
yeah.
And a
How
lot
would
of
you
it's
like? How would you?
really not.
Sorry to interrupt, but like, how would you encourage somebody to, walk through, like, because someone might kind of be listening and their gut might be like, oh, well, it's kind of true, but like those feelings really do get in the way, and they make it really hard to execute. And it's really scary to, like, your team isn't going to be happy about it. Your family isn't going to be happy about it because it's their family name, right? do you have any recommendations of how somebody can like process through that, or like, how to have those conversations, or like, how to make it make sense for the people around you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest thing I can say is the reason why and the manner in which it's communicated to the team should always be of the mindset that I am trying to build a better future for you. Okay.
Yeah.
The reason
Okay.
why we're doing this is because I have aspirations of growing this company and creating more opportunities for the people who work for me. And this is the pathway, this is one of the steps that I need to take in order to get us on that journey. Right.
That
So
makes sense.
so I certainly understand. Listen, I had a name for our agency for 17 years. It was called Graphic Designs. I talk about it in a little in my book.
Yeah.
I knew for probably 5 years prior that it should change, right? Because it wasn't who we evolved into. It was, I did it 25 years ago or 20 years ago when I named the company because I did graphic design work and I also did some sign work. So I thought it was clever, right? And then 17 years go by and I'm like, this isn't even what we do. Like we don't do like signs. We don't do graphic design. Like we're a branding agency, right? So we
Right.
changed the
Yeah.
name to KickCharge. So I had to go through the same experience myself where all my family was like, why would you ever change the name? You know, so I
Yeah.
have an understanding of it and I get it, but I can tell you this. I mean, from my perspective, like we never would have gotten to where we are today if I had kept the same name. Like there's zero chance of that happening. And I would
Mm,
say everyone that goes through a rebrand or even a renaming, you know, like I said, we do about 200, 250 a year. Um, I don't think I've ever experienced anyone that comes out on the other side of a rebranding or a renaming and says, "Oh man, I wish I had never done this." Like,
yeah.
I don't think it's ever happened in my 30 years of doing this that someone has regretted rebranding or just said, "Oh my God, this is such a huge mistake." The number one thing I will say that people say to us is, "I wish I had done this sooner." That's it. It's like if I had known what this is going to do for my business, I would have done this so much sooner,
Right.
and the effect that it was going to have on culture, the effect it was going to have on recruitment, the effect on my marketing spend, like all these things. But until you go through it, sometimes, yeah, it's super scary. I get it. And it's
Yeah,
not
for
easy to
sure.
do either. Like it's hard to execute. Like it's going to take work to do this. But like I
Yeah,
said,
I
no
think
one,
sometimes like how you have to look at something like that is like admit to yourself, like, yeah, for a little bit, like it's going to be hard and it's going to
yeah,
suck. But you don't have, that doesn't mean you have to be scared of it.
yeah,
You're going to
yeah.
do it. You're going to go through it,
And,
but then
and
you're going to
it's,
be,
it's just not knowing what it's going to look like sometimes. Well,
yeah,
like if they could see the logo before they went through it, maybe they'd be more excited about it. Like I get that
right.
part of it. But I joke with people all the time too when they're like a little worried about it or something. And I said, especially when we do naming, and I'm like, listen, I know exactly how this thing is going to play out. I know what the
Yeah,
truck looks like. I know what your billboards are going to look like, and this thing is going to crush it, right?
right.
But I said the same way you go in an attic and you see where the HVAC unit is, and you've got to figure out in your mind how to run the line set up there. I don't know
Yeah.
what that's going to look like. That's not my world. I have no idea to figure that stuff out. I just
Mhm.
know that the guy that I hired to do it knows what he's doing.
Yeah, good point. Yep.
So there's a certain amount of trust, and I get it. And listen, we talk people off the ledges all the time, where like you get to the ninth hour or the final hour, and they're ready to launch, and then suddenly they're scared. They're like, I don't know. I'm like, dude, just trust me on this. And like I said, I've never had anyone come back and say, "Oh my God, I'm so upset that we listened to you," or that this was a huge mistake. Like I don't think it's literally ever
That's good
happened.
data. That's good data, right?
Yeah.
So, if you've done this for, I don't know, do you know how many companies off the top of your head you guys have worked with?
I think it's a little over 3,000.
11, okay, so a little over 3,000, and you can't remember, at least, that immediately comes to mind, someone who's come back and regretted it.
Yeah.
And so I think that like that's good data. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's a very
Like
small
I said, it's
regret rate, very small buyer
everyone
remorse.
really. I think the other thing that people are most surprised about it too, Peter, if you really think about it too, like the original reasons why they do it are really more based on marketing reasons, right? So they're
Yeah.
looking to make their marketing more effective. Generally, that's the reason why. But then they find out afterward that as owners, that they have a renewed energy in the business. They have a changed mindset about where this company is going. And they have
Hmm.
this enthusiasm that had been flat or lacking prior to the rebrand. Because they also recognize then the enthusiasm that the employees have. They start seeing what the customers are saying about them and their brand, and they really get re-energized. So no one comes to us and say, Dan, I want to rebrand because I want to change my culture. Like no one comes
Right.
to us as their primary objective. But then they go through the process, and at the end of it, they're really, really surprised and of course really happy that suddenly they have all these other things about the rebrand that have changed, whether it's mindset, whether it's culture.
Hmm.
All these things have really been affected by that one change that they've made. And I think that that's a really cool thing to experience and to see the owners just get so excited and re-energized and
Yeah.
reinvigorated about their own company at that point.
You guys,
And
when you do these rebrands, like, do you attach them to like core values or just something that's like prevalent in that company's culture, or maybe some aspect of their service that's really important for them to do with customers? Like, do you tend to kind of look at what they already have going on in that area and then try to build a brand for them around what they're already kind of delivering, or are there instances where you're like helping them develop that and figure out who they are? Does that make sense?
yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes they have a really, really great foundation of a brand story that we need to flesh out and we need to bring to the surface and we need to make more visible in the
Okay.
identity, in the wording, in the tagline, especially, which is a great way to sort of infuse some of those storylines.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's challenges with that notion that stem from naming. So again, the TS Heating and Air, it's really, really hard for me to build a brand story around that particular name because it doesn't instinctively evoke a very specific visual or storyline that might go with it. Now, compare that to a name like Grasshopper Heating and Air, which is a company we named that used to be called PMC Mechanical, I think,
Hmm.
P something like that, right? Another initials, another name with the word mechanical, and we renamed them. They were at 100,000 in revenue when we renamed them to Grasshopper. Now, grasshoppers have a unique characteristics in that they can only move forward. Okay, they can't go backwards as one of the only insects I think that actually cannot go backwards. And so that really became the foundation of their storyline. Okay. So we
Hmm.
as a company will always be moving forward. We will always be moving forward in a manner to support our customers, to support the notion of providing a comfortable environment for their homes. So not only do you have a brand name that speaks to a promise that is not only for the external audience, but also functions amazing for your internal audience. So from an employee perspective, I
Yeah.
want to be a part of a company that's always moving forward. I want to be a
Yeah.
part of that. I want to be involved in this company that is of the mindset that we will always be moving forward as a company and doing everything in our power to empower our employees to move forward. So there's definitely opportunities with the right name and the right brand strategy to really flesh out some of those fundamental and foundational storylines. It just doesn't happen as often as you might suspect because sometimes you don't have a name and a foundation that will allow you to flesh some of those things out.
Yeah, that
And
makes
and
sense.
the thing is too is you want to try to think about it in a manner that you can have some of these storylines be communicated without the need for expensive ads and billboards and TV
Yeah,
campaigns
like
and
I'm looking
commercials.
at, some of your uh brands you've done it like the on your portfolio on your site. And like the one I was looking at, Plumbing Pals,
Yeah.
like I immediately feel like, oh, it's like it's my pal, or like it's a friendly,
Yeah.
that's the vibe. But like Fast Pro Restoration, right? You
Yeah.
have the word fast in there. If somebody's washer floods and they're,
Exactly.
that's exactly, what they're going to think of. Jay's Heating, like I think of, they're going to fly to my house when my AC breaks
Yeah,
down.
and
So
Jay's used to be J apostrophe S, and it was actually Jay's HVAC. And I don't know if on that page you can see their before of their old truck wrap. If you scroll down, if you click on their particular one, I don't know if their before is there, but their before, their truck was nearly illegible for their actual brand name. And I
I'm
said
share my
to him,
screen so people can see it. So,
I said to him, "Hey, we should change the name." Yeah, there's the old one. Now, it's really hard to read the name of the company, but the difference is striking, right? One
Yeah.
looks very professional. The other might catch my attention. I think they both catch your attention, but the original one, um, I would recognize having seen this van. I just wouldn't know who it was
Wouldn't
for.
remember.
And I don't think I
Yeah.
expect a premium service out of this particular company either.
Right.
And I think that's again the thing to be considering is you can make your truck pink and polka dots, and people would say they see it all the time. The challenge is disruption at the same time delivering a promise, and that's where most people are kind of falling short.
Yeah, like I mean, because the little guys moving company I was talking about, like I'm gonna remember it, right? I'm gonna probably, remember it if I need a moving company, but there's not necessarily a I don't necessarily know what their unique like selling
Yeah,
point is. Like what do they
right.
actually
Yeah.
do that's different or better or anything like that? Yeah, and I can see where that would be challenging to to accomplish both of those at the same time. For a brand, do you feel like the biggest bang for your buck comes in like standing out and being different so that you're memorable, or developing that unique brand promise? Like, I know it's a tough question because I know they go hand in hand, but like, if you had to choose one or the other, um, what would you personally choose?
Well, I can't showcase the promise if I don't land you first as a customer. So I
Okay,
would probably opt towards the notion of building something that feels disruptive, that feels memorable, that they can recall. And then when
okay,
I get the opportunity to service them, I can really work on fostering more of the notion of what that promise looks like and why they
gotcha.
chose to hire us.
So that like that standing out, that disruption, that memorability, that's kind of the like foundation that you operate from. Then you try to build a brand promise on top of that. It's kind of what it
Yeah.
sounds like.
Yeah, and that's why too, like even like the tagline becomes an important aspect, especially if the tagline can relate back to the visuals and can relate back to the name. So it's just another mechanism that we use to aid in making something more memorable, right? So I see
Mhm.
the visual has a direct relationship to the name. Like people, we just spoke about the brand for Grasshopper, but people maybe have never seen the Grasshopper brand. And if they want to go look on it, just Google Grasshopper Heating and Air in Albany and they can see it. But for those who have never seen it, I bet you they can imagine what it looks like, right?
Does it look like an orange elephant?
No, it does not look like an
Oh,
orange
really?
elephant.
That's what I would have guessed.
So
So
so those
no, I got you.
pathways, all those mechanisms are doing the same thing to try to make something more memorable. So you have the name, you have the visual, and then you have the tagline. And all of those three things work in harmony to hopefully deliver more of that brand story and that promise to them.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. For a company, I feel like like when I started my first business, like it was very scrappy, figuring out, who we're going to advertise for, what we're going to. So like, and I feel like every new business kind of goes to that phase of figuring out, who they are, figuring out what they actually do, what they're going to specialize in. And as companies grow, they might add on more services and stuff. So like, do you feel like investing in a brand, do you feel like that is something that, a brand new company should be jumping on right away? Do you feel like there's a good stage in their business of like, we figured out a little bit who we are and now we're going to brand? Like, what do you typically find is the sweet spot for that?
I mean, listen, the best time to brand your company is yesterday. It's the cheapest time to brand your company. So I understand as a startup, maybe you don't have the capital to do it correctly
Hmm.
day one. But I can tell you, if you can invest in it day one, it will make your path to success so much easier, right? So and ultimately less costly over time, right? So you could look at the investment in branding and say, I can't afford to do this right now. I will revisit this in a year. And a year goes by, and you've invested in digital marketing, you've invested in truck wraps and uniforms for the guys, all those tangible assets that now have your logo integrated on it. And now all those things are going to have to change and be redone. So you have the expense of redoing everything. And then you also have the expense of how much did not having a proper brand from day one actually cost me.
Yeah.
So what did it cost me in booking rates? What did it cost me in close rates? What did it cost me on my average tickets? What did it cost me on my inability to attract top tier talent because it doesn't look like a company I want to be a part of? And how much more did I need to spend on marketing because I was virtually invisible in the community I was trying to solve because my brand just blended in. So you could measure both sides of that, and that's going to sound
Yeah.
like very biased to me, for coming from me, which I understand. I would just say, read my book before you do anything from day one. And even if you're a year into it, read my book anyway. And understand what the true cost of poor branding actually is. And then it won't really seem like an investment that is too far out of reach.
Yeah.
I always say, Google loves weak brands. They make a fortune off of your inability to
Mm,
become a household name in your community. So we,
that
we
makes
talk about the
sense. Yeah.
notion of being 5 mile famous. And, you know, the more you blend in, the more it costs you. Bottom
Right.
line. So you could decide, well, me spending an extra $2,000 a month on LSA and PPC is the true cost of me having a weak brand, and then multiply that out by 12 months, and maybe investing in branding in day one doesn't seem like that much of a stretch.
Yeah.
Like
And
we even do
if anybody
financing.
watching this wants to, yeah, I do recommend reading that book because like even if you just don't have the capital to start with a well like correctly done brand from day one, even just naming your company correctly could save you a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be linking to that in the description as well. But
And
yes,
I'll say this
that'll
too,
be
Peter, like, so we have startups and they're like, well, this is really, expensive, an investment. And what we did about a year ago is we started basically financing half the cost of
okay.
doing a branding. And we don't go through a bank. We're not gonna run a credit check on you to do this. But I'm willing to put half of my money on this initiative because I know it's gonna work, right? So I'm gonna basically allow you to spend 50% upfront and then 50% over the course of 12 or 18 months. And I'm going to
Wow.
float
Yeah.
the money because I believe that this is going to work. I'm going to put my money on the line for this. And that's how much I believe it's critical to your success. Because we had a lot of people that couldn't swing it day one. And we said, well, how can we put this in more people's hands? And we tried to see if we could get a bank to help, and banks like, well, what's the collateral? And there is no collateral. So we said we got to figure out a way that we can put this in more people's hands and make it more affordable to do it as a startup or even a
Yeah.
$200,000 company. Like we wanted
Yeah.
to try to make it so they can do it. And
Yeah, and I think that says a lot that you're really, putting your money where your mouth is there. Like you're holding the bag, right?
yeah,
Because you're so confident in the results that it makes. I think for a lot of people, like it doesn't matter how many times you tell them something like, okay, well, this company, their revenue increased by 100%, or this average ticket, increased by $200. I think that for a lot of people, and this is true of myself too. So I'm not calling anyone out, but I feel like if you don't understand how something works, you're not necessarily going to believe that it works. So I'm
yeah,
just
yeah,
curious,
yeah.
like, can we dive into some of the math? Can we break down some of the math of like what's actually happening? How is that brand, resulting in cheaper leads or resulting in the leads, buying higher ticket? Like, can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things too that the book talks about, and I'm actually working on a second edition that dives deeper into the data and into the numbers. But that's one of the things that we've always been very diligent about, really trying to benchmark the results because, honestly, at the end of the day, what good is a really awesome logo and a really awesome truck wrap if it doesn't move the needle in a significant way, right?
Hmm.
What's the point of it then, right? So, I became really like obsessed with the notion of, how much does the brand actually affect the outcomes that
Right.
happen later on, and looking at 3 month, 6 month, 12-month results, and not just, specifically revenue increases. Revenue increases is one way to look at it, right? But revenue increase of course, can be attributed to many different things. Here's what I will say though, like the logo itself becomes the catalyst for significant change as one of the primary things that initiates that change. But you look at even companies that, from an operational perspective, again, do not change much about how they run, and then look at again acquisition costs, right? So you know, Peter, you know the deal on acquisition costs, right? And how much it
Right. Yeah.
costs to acquire this company, and we've looked at stuff where like, you know, we have a blog post about a company we rebranded called High Tide Plumbing, and you know, their cost per booked call before rebranding was $129. Okay, the cost after rebranding was $64. Cost per
Wow.
acquisition, $155. Cost per acquisition after, $76. Average ticket up $200 per ticket. And then even close rate, 54% versus 69%. So these are tangible, very specific. And you look at their old truck and you would say, well, the old truck was a white truck and the logo was shitty
Yeah.
and it wasn't very memorable. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge part of the problem.
So
Um,
one thing, like but what I'm looking at is like the way that actually happens, right? So like earlier you mentioned like one way that happens is less spend on Google, right? So if somebody, they're familiar with Grasshopper and, they need an
they know
AC
the name.
company, maybe they'll just Google Grasshopper
Yeah.
instead of,
Yeah.
AC company, and then they have to bid on AC company and then pay for that click, right? So what are
Yeah.
some other ways that that brand is actually helping, like in addition to that?
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a huge piece, right? So they know the name, they're 5 Mile famous within the community, so people know them. They're not relying on Google to deliver the paid result. They're getting the organic result, right? So branded
Right.
keyword searches, as you know, the better the brand, the more branded keyword searches you would expect to get. So that's another huge piece of the puzzle. But the other piece are are things related to the other KPIs like average ticket, booking rates, close rates. So how does brand affect those three different KPIs? And again, that's more psychology. That's all consumer psychology. It's all about what the consumer believes. Grasshopper's booking rate is 93%.
Mm,
It's
wow.
crazy.
That
93% of every phone call that comes in gets booked into an appointment. Okay, that's relatively unheard of in the home service space.
for sure.
Okay, but why is it so high? Well, I'm not taking anything away from their amazing CSRs, who are absolute rock stars, but the people who are calling are already almost sold.
Hmm.
They already know what the deliverable is going to be. They've seen the trucks, they've seen the billboards, they've seen her involved in community events. Okay. So all those things are signaling to that consumer, I'm going to get a good experience. I know this name already. I'm familiar with it. I've seen it in my neighbor's driveway. I've seen it at the 4th of July parade. I
Yeah.
remembered it. So those are all the other aspects. So if they're pre-sold before they make the phone call, how much easier do you think it's going to be for us and how much less expensive is it going to
Yeah.
be for us to service that particular
A
homeowner?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's so important. Like, because you're not trying to, take a crappy company and be like, hey, everybody like make it look really good so they get phone calls. You're just saying we want to take this company that has amazing service and we
Yeah.
want we want that to be super easy for customers to identify, right? There's a saying like, don't judge a book by its cover. But you might have a really, really good book. But
Yeah.
if the cover doesn't match that, people are going to choose a different book with a different cover.
100%.
So that's some like people might be offended or hurt a little bit about like, how good their service is and this and that, and then they can't close deals, but some of that is just the psychology, is just that the customer just doesn't understand or doesn't believe. Maybe the lead was a really good lead, but they just didn't understand or believe,
Right.
that you guys do actually have that better service.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's good. So when you guys like, um because there's the side of it of like the company's, unique selling points and being better at their service and all that good stuff. um the other side of it is like customer demographics. So, different types of businesses, the biggest difference is like, okay, plumbing company on this end of the spectrum, and then like high end design build company over on this end of the spectrum, right? Different demographics, might be some overlap, but there's going to be there might be a unique way to draw those higher end customers. So, what do you guys typically do, design wise to appeal to different types of demographics? And how important is that for different types of businesses?
I think largely they're still similar.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
when you look at the fact that I think it's 84 or 85% of all home purchasing decisions are initiated by women.
Hmm.
I would imagine on the remodeling side, it's probably even higher. And so
I
when
can
we
see
think
that.
about branding, we are always thinking about Mrs. Jones as our target demographic, whether it's premium or middle of the road. I would say the vast majority of people that are hiring us are premium providers, or at least aspiring to be premium providers. And so they want that they want the brand to attract those types of customers that are not looking for the cheaper alternatives. They're not looking for, and it sounds like I'm gonna trash like a bath fitter, but they're not
Hmm.
looking for someone to come in like in a day and do
Right.
something at a lower cost. They're looking for a more custom and unique product on the
Sure.
home service side, or the renovation side, I should say. And so I still think that those demographics are largely very, very similar in nature. They have the same fears, they have the same concerns, they have the same bias against contractors. They're
Hmm.
worried about who's coming to their home. They're worried about the job not being done correctly, and them not being treated fairly. Those are all legitimate and real concerns and bias that homeowners, especially women, have against contractors. So, how does the brand help alleviate those fears? How does all our communication channels help speak to those fears, and make them feel like the person I'm inviting into my home is going to do the right thing for me? And
Yeah,
everything about the marketing should be speaking to that.
that
It's
totally
one of,
makes
it's one of the reasons why, like, I see brands sometimes with a big, heavily muscled mascot that looks like he's going to beat the shit out of the homeowner. And I'm just like, I
right.
don't understand who you think you're communicating to, but this is not what she wants to see. She's
Yeah.
already worried about who's coming to the home. And now I'm going to build a brand around a heavily muscled, aggressive looking mascot. This is
Yeah.
absolutely who she does not want in her home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think part of that is honestly just like, if you're a technician and you're working for another company and you go out and you start on your own, um, it's really fun, in some like you're doing your own thing, and so you want to do something that's cool for you. Like you feel
Right.
cool, you feel
Exactly.
like that masculine,
Yep.
guy on the logo. But there's a certain sense in like you have to be willing to let go of yourself a little bit and look at like how is this realistically going to impact the bottom line of my business? And is that a price worth paying so that I can feel cool? You know what I mean? I think that's just a conversation that people need to have with themselves, when it comes to that type of thing. But on the note of, brands that are just a little bit, well, this is actually, maybe it's not the same note, but like, um, there's some companies that, they basically make they stand out by being very polarizing or being very like taking some kind of bold stance or take political or otherwise. But there's a company that I get my jeans from, and this isn't why I buy from them. I honestly found them on a Google search, but they're super like their brand tone is like super like brash and rebellious, and their slogan
Yep.
is like "F your khakis." And I'm just curious: is there a not in that specific way, but is there a case study for HVAC companies to stand out by maybe not necessarily like rather than maybe a brand promise, just doing something super different and polarizing that's going to really resonate with a certain percentage of the population? Is there any kind of case study for that, you think?
I mean, listen, I know the brand you're talking about. Like, I think it's clever, and I think it's I don't know if it's quite as polarizing, but I know what you mean. Like, I
Yeah.
know the point you're trying to make. Um, I tend to want to shy away from different strategies that give me the potential to alienate a decent amount of my potential target audience.
Hmm.
Um, and I still think there's ways to do it in a manner that I don't have to alienate a bunch of the audience.
Okay.
in the process of doing it. And you'll see people with the mindset to say, well, I don't give a shit about those people then. If they don't want to use me because of me feeling like this or
Sure.
whatever, great. Like, and I just say, well, like, why do we need to alienate anyone in the
Yeah.
process of marketing? But I get the notion of trying to be edgy and things. Like, I remember an example of somebody that was giving away like an AR-15 rifle for some type of promotion or something like that.
Right.
And then he had, some people that were maybe not as favorable on gun control as he might like them to be, and it sort of
Right.
became this notion of, well, like, it'll be awesome because I'm just going to attract people just like me, and that's who I want to do business with. And
Right.
maybe that worked, maybe it didn't, but I just thought it was a little strange to want to invite that sort of negativity into my brand or
Yeah.
my brand persona. And I always just think it's easier to maybe um, do it in a way that invites promise and speaks to promise
Hmm.
rather than something that has a potential to alienate. Now, you may have like that the company with the shorts, like maybe you like khaki shorts. And
Right.
now you're like, well, I'm not gonna buy from these guys because they're like
Yeah.
making fun of me. Like, so
Good point.
so
Yeah.
I get it too. Like, so I can see it. I think in certain instances I could see it making more sense than others. But I tend to be a little bit more conservative, and maybe that's just old school.
Yeah.
But I just tend to be a little bit more conservative in my thought process there.
Yeah. And I think there are so many things like that. Like you can read in a marketing book, you can read that like, oh, well, it's really good to, do something it's okay if you're only appealing to a small segment because, that one segment will want you all the more, right? And
Yeah,
listen, maybe that works for like a, a company that their target audience is, like that company I was just talking about, by the way, the perfect gene.
yeah,
Their target audience is however many, adult males live in the US, right? And so they can just get a tiny slice of that pie and it's still going to be millions of customers. But if you're in a local, you talk about like being known in the 5 mile radius or whatever. If you're in that local area and you divide that pie too small, it's just not applicable to your,
right.
it's harder to execute.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
Have you seen anything else like that? That's, um, some of those like big ideas that are kind of touted, but they're not really like as applicable to a home service company. Have you come across anything like that?
I mean, certainly I see some big ideas like that are more for a packaged good or packaged products that make a
Hmm.
little bit more sense in the marketing mix. But again, the needs of a homeowner and the typical life cycle for that particular decision is usually something that's less impulsive and more built up over time. And so, again, I think there's a lot of really great strategies that comes from CPG and consumer packaging and that mindset of how to sort of build what they call aisle violators as you're walking down the aisle
Yeah.
and something like disrupts you and things like that. But I think some of that is shared in the sense of what are you doing to be disruptive? But I tend to try to think a little bit. You can think outside the box in terms of mechanisms you can deploy to really connect with them in a different fashion. Like, what are
Hmm.
some channels that are being underutilized? And I look at some even
Hmm.
painfully obvious ones that feel like, well, duh, like, shouldn't you be doing that? But most people
Right.
don't. Like, even just like the sponsorship of the soccer teams and the little leagues
Mm.
and the basketball teams and having your name on the back of the jersey of 15 kids for an entire
Yeah.
season that's going to cost you $150. Like, do you
Yeah.
think any one of their parents are going to go to a different contractor to get their HVAC serviced? You know what I mean? So
Yeah. That
there's
makes
some
sense.
more traditional and even more obvious mechanisms to build a brand within your community that people don't want to do because they take effort and they take time, and they're more
Yeah.
apt to say to a digital marketing company, hey, you know what? Let's just increase the budget this month another $2,000 on LSA.
Yeah.
And they
Exactly.
forget that, again, buying leads is not really marketing per se. It's buying leads. You know what I mean? Like, and
For
yes, you can
sure.
argue that the having a lifetime value of a customer, like, I understand that too, but what are we doing to really reinvest back into the community that we serve. And I think those are the things that pay dividends a little bit more longer term and obviously are not as immediate as a paid search, but are still really, really important to making you less dependent on paid search.
Yeah, and like you make a good point too. Like, there's big things you can do. You can do some big crazy, strategy. But I think a lot of times where business owners fall short, myself included, is just like, being willing to take the time and do the work that it takes on those kind of those little things that make the difference, that move the needle, that are hard to do, are a
Yeah,
big opportunity because they're hard to do, right? And a lot
right.
of other companies, just might not put in the time or the effort. Where if you're showing up, that's where the opportunity really is. Um,
Absolutely.
and we'll kind of wrap it up here, but something that I wanted to touch on here, I just, this is more on a personal note, but reading or listening to your book and watching that, the kick charge story video, it really comes across like um how important it is for you to make a real difference for your clients, and to not just cash the check, do what the business owner wants you to do because that's what they'll pay you to do and that's the easiest. But you want to do something that actually makes a difference. So, like, for you, can you open up a little bit and share kind of like where that comes from? Where does that, how is that desire embedded in you? Where does that come from?
Well, I mean, listen, the trades have been obviously really important to me. They've allowed us to build a great team and to affect people's lives. And I think that that's a responsibility that is really important. We have a tagline, we build brands that change lives, and with that comes
Mm.
a significant responsibility that we're tasked with. And everyone here shares that mission. We have people here that worked for big ad agencies, and the work that they did not have meaning. Like whether that company sold more, wireless contracts or sold more cookies or
Right.
whatever the case may be, they weren't changing people's lives with their work. And so they really were attracted to what we do here, which is we affect change to so many people, not just the owners, but the people that work for the owners and their customers. Like, so there's a lot that's involved in what we do. And I've always just been on the mindset that I will fight so hard in your best interest, even if what you're asking me, I know in my heart is the wrong solution for your company. I'm going to tell you that. And I think that has served us well because there's often the mindset in the design world where designers throw their hands up and are like, whatever, just I'll do what you're asking me to do and I'll just
Right. Yeah.
cash my check and I will move on with my life. And maybe that's really unhealthy for me. But I have never been that way. And I will fight for what I believe is in your best interest. And I believe that that's why you hired me also. You hired me
Mm.
because you want what's best for your company. If you're asking me to
Right.
do something that is not in your best interest, it is really incumbent upon me to let you know. And I'm not going to be a jerk about how I let you know and say
Right.
you're wrong, dude. I'm going to explain why I think
For
what you're
sure.
asking me to do is not in your best interest. And I will do whatever you want at the end of the day, but I will make it known that in my professional experience that the solution you would like us to take will not benefit you. Um,
Right.
and and honestly, 98% of the people trust that experience and that expertise. And I'm not doing it for ego. I'm not doing it for anything. I'm doing it because I'm going to fight for what's right for your company. And
Mm.
you hopefully respect that expertise. And that's
Right.
originally why you hired me in the first place. And so everyone here is empowered with that as well. So all my designers and the people here, and even the account team, as we're working with clients, we're asked to do things that are not in their best interest often. And I'm gonna let you know, like, hey, you know what,
Right.
dude, like, here's why that's not a good idea. Let's do this instead. Or, here's what we should be doing instead.
For sure.
So I wish that more in the design space, I wish even more people in the digital space, really respected that responsibility.
Yeah.
And we're honest with people that are hiring them. You know, like even
For
like
sure.
people that come to us and they love what we do for truck wraps, and they were like, hey, here's our truck, here's our logo. We want you to do our truck wrap, and they have something that will never function well on a truck. And so I have the difficult task of telling them I cannot work with this. I'm not going to take money for something I don't believe in because it
Right.
will not move the needle in a corresponding fashion to the ROI you need to invest with us to do it. So I'm not going to take your money for something that will not deliver any substantial ROI. And I think that sometimes I'm the first person to tell them that. Like the truck
Yeah.
wrap company didn't tell them that. The digital marketing company didn't tell them that.
Yeah.
They're just like, hey, oh yeah, just give us your logo and then we'll put it on top of on the website. Okay, cool. But maybe the conversation should have been, hey, by the way, did you ever consider the fact that your logo doesn't do X, Y, and Z and
Yeah.
looks really, bad, and there's a certain way to do it, but I was just never interested in just cashing checks for stuff that I didn't believe in.
For sure.
I think that that's served us well over the last 30
Yeah.
years. Um, I'm fortunate maybe that I'm in a position that I can say no to work that I don't agree with or that I don't think will
Great.
work.
Yeah, I
And
got
maybe
you.
that's the difference. Maybe other people are desperate and they need every job that comes across. Um, but I don't want to have my name associated with something that I know is not in the best interest of a client. So
Love it. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. If a contractor watching this would like to work with you guys, what's their next step?
I'm sure they could just, go to kickcharge.com and fill out the request a quote and myself or someone on the team could, get back to them and, have a conversation and take a look at what they currently have. I mean, if you have something that you're about to do right now, like wrap a truck, or you've got something that you're looking to roll out and you want feedback on it. Again, I don't take any particular joy in you know shining a light on flaws of your brand, but if you
Right.
want somebody to take a look at it, I'm happy to do that. Or I would say buy the book, or there's a ton of resources on our YouTube channel about branding, about effective truck wraps, about naming, a lot of the topics that we talked about here. And if you really want to, go down a rabbit hole, there's a ton of content that you can educate
Yeah.
yourself. And I often say too, like just because you can't hire a KickCharge, or maybe you can't use us, or maybe you decide you want to use somebody else, that's fine. But the best thing you can do for your business is to really become as educated on this particular topic so that no matter who you're working with, you'll have
Mm,
a very good understanding of how it's supposed to work. And sadly, in a lot of instances, you'll be more educated on the person that you're working with. And that's just the unfortunate reality of what
right.
that world looks like right now.
Yeah.
But the more you know, hey, obviously the better. I love it working with people that truly understand branding, or they've read my book, or they've seen me speak, and they get it, and those are the best clients to work with because they understand the objective, they understand what they do, they understand that maybe it should feel a little uncomfortable what I'm telling them
Mm,
they should
yeah.
do,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
and getting out of that comfort zone is actually a really positive thing for them.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
um,
Yeah, and kind of closing up here, but like the yeah, absolutely. Getting out of that comfort zone. It is, if you're watching this and you're seeing the truth in a lot of this, but your emotions are like, kind of preventing you from wanting to make a change, and like, oh well, it's hard, right? It's hard to even consider when
yeah.
when you automatically know the pushback you're going to get from your team, from your family, from whoever. It's hard to even let yourself consider something. But as a business owner, there is a hard job that we have, which is to stare reality in the face, even if it's scary, even if it's, going to push back, even if it's going to be painful at times. But if you can develop that ability to do that, you can go far. So on that note, hey, thank you so much, Dan, for being on. Um, Absolute pleasure to finally get to sit down with you. And yeah, if you haven't read Dan's book, definitely go read it. Branded, not blanded. I'm going to be linking to it below. Thank you, Dan.
All right, thanks, Peter.
Take care.